This is Tyler, your antisocial critic and the host of the Antisocial Network, your number one source for anachronistic conversations online. Come join us each week to hear opinions from some of the best voices discussing entertainment, politics, religion, and modern life on the internet today, most of which you've never heard of, but I have. This week we are joined for the second time by Arlie Coles, who is our resident Anglican expert for the show, I guess, if that's what we want to call her, but what title would you like to be introduced by?
I have no preference. I'm just somebody who's been around for a while, and I've seen lots of stuff, so I can explain the stuff.
Sure. So, how have you been since the last show? I know you and I have talked a little bit off air, but I'm curious. How would you describe things like how's life going?
Pretty good. I mean, I'm glad that we seem to be on the other side of some of the COVID madness. Seems like it anyway. Although we're now getting other foreign policy madness to replace it, I guess, which is not ideal.
Yeah, I mean, this episode's going to be releasing, I believe, on the third day of Lent, and at the time of recording, we are currently watching the World War break out. So for all I know, I may be drafted by the time that this goes up, but you never know with this sort of thing. So
yeah, fingers crossed things end up in a better situation than they are today.
That's the hope. I mean, I don't think it went on Twitter, but I've been sharing out the Book of Common Prayer's book, Prayer for Peace, all over social media, just as a, it's all I can do at the moment, because obviously we're both half a world away from everything that's happening. But it's something that's available at the moment. But
yeah, it's nice to have something that can kind of put words in your mouth when you don't really know what to say. I mean, another thing that goes around in Anglican circles whenever there's times of trouble or tumult or whatever is the Great Litany, which is also in the prayer book. It's in pretty much every prayer book. It's actually the oldest piece of English language liturgy ever, I think. It's one of the very, very first ever translated into English, I think at least 1549, if not earlier. And it's got some really good stuff in there about when things get rough. And so whenever your priest or just even your lay people friends pull that out, you kind of know that things are going down. So it's not an inappropriate thing to do now as well, to pray the Great Litany.
Speaking of which, I've upgraded in my Book of Common Prayerness. So, ever since I started attending an ACA church, I met up my priest, and the second time I met him, he just straight up just gave it to me. So now I have a.
That's great.
Yeah, I mean, I think
looks like it has nice ribbons in it and everything.
Oh yeah, it's got like 5 ribbons on the bottom for all your purposes. Which I guess is important. I haven't quite gotten the habit down yet because it's still intimidating as a book, but it is something I'm working on trying to get down, because I think that kind of discipline is kind of what I need at the moment. But otherwise, I mean, I asked you how I'm doing. On my end of things, like, my life is, I guess, completely different now, because I think we talked right before I moved to Nashville. So I moved to Nashville, and then I started attending the church, an Anglican church. So my entire spiritual life is taken multiple left turns in the last 6 months, and obviously I do owe some of that to you, but somehow you managed to be the one person to actually convince me to go to their church, as opposed to all of my Unitarian and Catholic friends who have been trying to tempt me to the dark side for a long time. So congratulations on that front.
Well, that's good. I mean, one kind of point of view that's pretty proper to the Anglican tradition is that we do see ourselves as a branch of the wider church. We don't make that claim of exclusivity that some of my Roman Catholic dear friends might make. This is the church and everything outside of it isn't. We don't quite think that, so maybe there's a little less pressure. And you can always attend, and if you decide to go elsewhere, then so be it. But whenever things are as crazy as they are, it's kind of nice to just have somewhere to be able to land. Kind of work through those things. So I'm glad it's been a good experience for you so far.
Indeed. I mean, I've kind of been able to gauge how what kind of life decisions I've been making by how many doors just wildly open up in front of me and suck me through, and this has been one of them. So, I mean, when I moved to Nashville, it was abrupt, and Nashville is one of those cities that's extremely hard to move to because there's nothing available rent or purchase-wise. But I went down there for one trip for an apartment search, and I found an apartment on the first application. And so I'm like, okay. Then I got my U-Haul in Illinois. which is one of the most U-Haul deficient states in the country. Okay, we're going in a good direction. And the same thing kind of happened when I got to the church. Like, there was a Sunday where every church in Tennessee was closed because of snow. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to try to go to one of the more liturgical churches outside of town, since they're probably open. And I ended up going to an ACA church up in the suburbs of Nashville. It's a bit of a drive for me, but it was worth it, and it ended up being I just watched that happen, where like every door opened as I walked in, and I walked in, and like guy got in, and there were young people there, and the young people were like, "We've been praying for another young person to show up, and you just happened to show up." And then the church choir lady is like, "Do you have any experience singing?" And I'm like, "Well, I have 7 years of choral experience." It's like, "Oh, good. We need someone who can sing, but doesn't have to show up to choral performances rehearsals every week because no one lives in town." I'm like, I sense that I'm being called to do something here. I don't know what it is, but maybe the doors are opening for a reason. So
yeah, if the snow in Tennessee made you go there, then that's a sign.
Well, yeah. I mean, the alternative was the Progressive Presbyterian Church, where the sermon was about the importance of gay and trans priests. So
yeah, you got to put the focus. There's this phrase, let the main thing be the main thing, and that's not really the main thing.
I know the Episcopalian Church is famous for being welcoming to all sorts of different people, but main things are important.
Yeah, you got to preach the resurrection. If you're not doing that, then you're falling short of a very main task, I would say.
There you go. But I guess switching back to the general topic, I specifically asked you to come on because I wanted to talk about the liturgical calendar, because it is something that I've been curious about since I kind of started becoming liturgy curious. This is the copy that I was given at the church, and I've actually been as just not for no reason in particular. I've just been trying to keep up with liturgical colors for my dressing attire. So I go to church every Sunday in a blazer and dress pants, but I've been trying to match my button down to whatever the liturgical color is that week. Although I might have to stop that for Lent because I don't have a purple one yet. But you're
gonna run out of purple shirts in short order, and then once summer runs around, you're really gonna run out of green shirts. The ordinary time lasts a long time.
I just need the one because I don't dress up in a blazer every day. I just need it for Sunday.
And you're gonna be that guy who always wears a green shirt.
Well,
green shirt.
Technically speaking, there's four liturgical colors, so I'll be the guy that wears 4 shirts a year, so not just one. But I was hoping we could kind of start going into how the liturgical calendar is structured a little bit, because I've heard a little bit of explanation on it, but it seems like there's a lot of things that kind of need to be explained about it, and I was hoping that we could kind of delve a little deeper into that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, maybe it's useful. I mean, for people like you who might be coming from a tradition that doesn't really celebrate the calendar, or maybe I can back up and just ask you. So in your background, I mean, as far as I know, a lot of evangelical Christians or non-denominational Christians in general, they might celebrate Easter and Christmas. I think that's pretty familiar. But then, other than that, I mean, what's the temperature like? Is there an awareness of seasons and that type of thing in your background?
No, I mean, if you go to a Foursquare Bible Church or a Southern Baptist Church or any of the old school mainline churches that no longer that you no longer practice liturgy, they recognize Christmas and Easter essentially as the 2 holy days of the year. And I think that there might be some smatterings of smaller ones in there somewhere, but beyond that, there's not a lot of it. I'm assuming some of that has to do with sola scriptura, where it's like, oh, where does in the Bible does it say to celebrate All Saints' Day? It was like, but there's Protestants are pretty tradition and averse and pretty superstition averse, which is why so many of them are radically anti-Halloween. So when I was growing up, we were aware of things like Lent, but people who did Lent were those weird people over in the corner that weren't quite as religious as we were, because the great positivity bias of all religion is my branch is the most religious branch, and all the other ones are damned to eternity because they're wrong.
Right, or one is doing something that's not in the Bible, or something like that, I guess. So yeah, I guess just maybe we can start there. Yeah, I mean, it's true that a lot of the liturgical seasons, obviously, you're not going to find them word for word in the Bible, but that does not mean that they don't have any kind of scriptural basis. So just in the long history where we position ourselves as Christians, we come from the same philosophy as the Jews, and the Jews in the Bible definitely had their feasts and their celebrations and their calendar. So those are integral to the Bible story. You think about things like Passover. We get very direct narrative about Passover. And you shall do this every year to remember that this happened. Remember when God brought you out of Israel, and that type of thing. You get direct mentions of the Feast of Unleavened Bread and the Feast of Booths and things like this that have corresponding meaning in even the gospel narratives. Things happen at certain times for certain symbolic reasons. And so we take this practice from our Jewish roots when we are observing and entering into events in the past that describe things that God has done. And Christians carry this on. And so maybe to get beyond that kind of narrow box of, well, where does it appear in the Bible? We can also think in terms of how we are as temporal creatures, about why it's important to separate our time out. So we know that God made everything, right? He made all material in the world. And we're material, and he likes material. He made us. That's the C.S. Lewis quote, he likes matter, he invented it. And so one consequence of us being material is that we do live in time. It's a fundamental part of what it means to be a person that is made of material, that we have to pass through time. And just like all other material that God made in the beginning, he also made time. So time is just material over a different dimension. It's one way to think of it. In modern physics, we think about this often with the notion of space-time. And time is a creature. And at the same time, when man fell in the garden, material was corrupted, but time was also corrupted. And so working in the bounds of that, one of our jobs as Christians is to redeem material that we work with, in our own bodies and the earth around us, right? That's an important thing we do. How we act with our bodies matters, so that we can take the gift that God gave us that is fallen due to our own issues, sanctify it and offer it back up to God. Time is an extension of that, so that the time that we move through and experience, it's our job to observe it properly, to sanctify it, and to offer it back up to God. So the liturgical calendar, or the church year, you might hear those terms used rather interchangeably, is one way of sanctifying time that normal people, that lay people can do. It's the church's job, but importantly, I think for Protestants, it's not just something clerics or monks do, it's something that lay people do as they move through their lives. So in the monasteries, for example, monks, people whose job it is to pray all day, they pray the liturgy hours, they pray every X number of hours, I think 7 times a day and things like this. Lay people don't have time to do that, but we are doing something like what those monks did, but for the lay person when we move through that in our everyday life. We don't always have time to operate on the schedule of hours that they did. But we can operate on days and weeks and seasons. That's something that we have a good grip on. And so it's a really useful thing, I think, for the Protestant tradition to kind of reclaim that liturgical tradition. This is something that's a gift from the tradition of the church, but it's something that is easily adaptable to lay people, just as much as anybody else. It's part of our job as individual Christians to sanctify the time that we're going through and to offer that back up to God.
This is a tangential question, but does Anglicanism have any sort of history of monastic orders or monasticism?
It's a little complicated. So in the English Reformation, this is something that Henry VIII did away with, and there's all sorts of political reasons behind that. But he did clear out the monasteries when breaking away from Rome, and a lot of people think that this is unfortunate and have reclaimed it since. So the original answer is no. It was founded on ditching some of those things, but there's been 500 years since. And so you will find some groups of Episcopalian or Anglican in other countries, brothers and sisters, yes. not to mention that the morning and evening prayer in the Book of Common Prayer are condensed versions of the monastic hours. So it's natural for the Anglican tradition to be liturgical in this way. We're liturgical on every day. We separate out the day into morning and evening and do morning and evening prayer. And we separate out the year as well. We do our liturgical seasons and days and special feasts and so on. It's kind of a big continuum. You can split it as finely as you like, or you can do it on as broad of a scale as you like.
Is the Anglican calendar ecumenical with all of the other liturgical traditions? Like, is it the same calendar as the Catholic and the Orthodox calendar?
So, good question. In the Western tradition, mostly yes. There are some, special saints or something that are celebrated in some groups, but not others. But the broad strokes are the same. So this is another kind of plus of entering into this tradition, is that it is ecumenical. You get to share this not only across people today, but you get to share it in backward and forward directions. People who came before you and people who come after you. The East is a bit of a different story, just because that schism happened so early. However, they call their seasons some different names, and they do have a few different ones than the West does, but the major ones are still the same. So they do have a Christmas season, they do have a great fast, like a Lent before Easter, they do have an Easter season, and so on. But the calendars are not exactly the same due to schism outworkings, let's say. But that is a good thing to point out as well, that there are commonalities that extend even beyond that. And the East-West schism happened in 1004. So we're looking at things that are really extremely old, very old in the history of Christianity when we do this liturgical calendar business. Some of the earliest Christians were doing the same things that we do now, and the same things that people will do in the future. This is a underpinning of the idea of the communion of saints, the communion of the church and Christians over time. So we're sanctifying time, not only ourselves, but all Christians who have come before, who will come after in their own little way.
Is there a general place where we know the liturgical calendar comes from? Was that a council or a creedal decision?
I think different seasons probably have different roots. As far as I know, the one that really, really goes back, and it makes sense with the primacy of the feast, is Easter and Lent leading up into Easter. Obviously, Easter is the major event of the whole year. The resurrection, we can't do without it. And it was often connected to the catechumens, the ones who were coming to the faith, usually as adults in the early Christian community, because they were already adults when the events unfolded, or when the church came their way. And so Lent, in particular, leading up into Easter, was a period of fasting, but also a period of preparation to be baptized at Easter. Because if there's a time to be baptized, Easter's a really nice symbolic time to do it. You've died and you're being risen again with Christ, who's resurrected on that day. I know that Lent and the Easter feast reaches way, way, way back. We're talking 1st, 2nd century Christianity. You can find documents that attest to the practices of how the baptisms worked and all of that. So other seasons, especially individual feasts for individual saints, things like that, some of those have evolved over time. But the large lines have been there pretty much from the very beginning.
I mean, I guess to start out with, if we want to just go into the individual seasons, we should probably start with Lent, since, like I said, this is roughly going to be premiering through 3 or 4 days into Lent. So, what is the how does Lent work from where you're from the Anglican side of things? Do they participate in the fast like the Catholics do?
Yes, although there's a nice Anglican maxim that I think is appropriate to bring out at this time whenever we talk about fasting or other, ascetic type practices. We have this saying that goes, no, I hope I don't mess it up when I say it. All can, some should, none must. So where some more rigorous traditions would impose things on people, even if it's beyond what the capacity is, depending on the time and place. Anglicans are quite receptive to the idea that, well, maybe a strict fast is not something that everybody is in a position to do. You do the thing that is conducive to your own situation. But yes, there is certainly an attitude of penance, of fasting, of self-examination, and of preparation to observe the coming observation of the passion and the death and resurrection of Jesus. So Lent in the Western tradition, now this is something that's common between Anglicans and Catholics. It's still a 40-day season. It begins on Ash Wednesday. And 40 days there is an important number. So that reflects the 40 days that Jesus spent in the wilderness, where he was fasting and he was tempted by Satan. And he overcame that temptation and then went on to begin his ministry and ultimately start down that road that will lead to Jerusalem and lead to his passion, death, and resurrection. So this is a time of preparation for the most important event of the church calendar. And liturgically, we treat it that way. It's a time where things are very stripped back. A lot of the more festive elements of the church services are stripped away. And over Lent, these things get more and more stripped back until we're left with the really almost bleak nature of the Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, and Holy Saturday services, which of course lead into Easter. We can get to that momentarily. But so what we see in the liturgical services is reflected often by people's private practices. They're in no case mandatory. All can, some should, none must. Often people will do things like giving something up, giving up some small indulgence, or trying to make time in their schedule for some devotional practice or something like that over Lent. And really the goal of that is to follow Jesus as he's in the desert, and prepare ourselves like he was preparing himself to observe this great event that's coming after.
Well, as my priest said, if you're gonna do it right, don't swear off polar bear meat and then live your life exactly the way you were before. So it's gotta actually hurt a little. But what it kind of is there any other formal structure within the tradition for how to fast? Because fasting is one of the few things I remember from my evangelical tradition that actually is semi-practiced, but it's never done in any sort of formal way. It's always just done as something where, get 20 people in a room together and we agree to fast for 6 hours and sit together. It's not something that's done with any sort of formality.
I see. Yeah, I'm less familiar with that side of the house, but usually I'm no big faster either. I mean, I fall down in this area, but yeah, I mean, people who practice that more rigorously than I do, I think they, one very common thing is to abstain from meat. To do that on Friday. You might hear that from your Roman Catholic friends who are, that's a little bit more codified for them than it is for us. You're free to abstain from meat. That's one little thing you can take away. I'm not too sure about what the rigorous practices behind this might be, but I really think there's a flexibility here that permits to whatever you can deal with, whether it's skipping a meal or just abstaining from some nice thing. I've heard of people doing things like not putting cream in their coffee, things like this, just small indulgences that you should abstain from. Or if you think but the goal of the fast is to cultivate hunger. And that's more than one kind of hunger, by the way, which is why you do it. You're not only cultivating hunger for the food, but when you take away the possibility of you receiving that food, you can direct that desire to something else. Fasting is ultimately an ascetic practice, and it's intended to increase your hunger for God. And specifically within the Anglican tradition, your hunger for the Eucharist on Sunday. And so one important thing here to point out, by the way, is that technically when you reckon the 40 days of Lent, Sundays do not count. So you'll hear of people who have some Lent fast practice who get to break it on Sunday. I've given up donuts, but I can have one on Sunday, And the reason for this is because Sunday is the Lord's Day. Sunday is a mini Easter. Every Sunday is a mini Easter. So we talk about the church calendar on the annual level, but it just as well operates on the weekly level. Every Sunday is a mini Easter where you celebrate the resurrection and the communion of Christ with his people in the Eucharist. It's always a great day when you celebrate the Eucharist on the Lord's Day. So that's kind of the thematic thing that takes precedence. We say that the Sundays that take place during Lent are in Lent, but they're not of Lent. So that's one little semantic thing that you might see. You get little breaks, and that's important when you're trying to do a fast for 40 days, whether it's big or small.
I mean, in my experience, you don't break an addiction by, taking a day off from your addiction breaking, but once a week. But,
That's true.
I guess it depends on how serious you're taking it and what it is. I mean, obviously, I've met some some people that take their fast extremely seriously to like the point where we're like, oh, I'm gonna go 24 to 48 hours without food or water. I'm like, okay, you're insane, but
Yeah, don't do anything that puts your, health at risk, right? I mean, that's not the goal. And a fast, I should also say, I guess, a fast is not a diet. You're not doing it for the goal of like, oh, I'm going to make a lifestyle change that serves my personal goals. I mean, that's kind of baked in there a little bit, but not in the same way that something like a diet would be. A fast is meant to sacrifice something that you can use as a practice of self-denial. Whenever we deny something in ourselves, we can fill it with something for other people. And so another kind of thematic strand of Lent is that you're supposed to fast, but you're also supposed to give alms. This is also a time where you can take what you would have been giving to yourself and give it to somebody else. And that's important as well.
My priest said, you can stop going to Starbucks for 40 days and take the $6,000 you would invest in Starbucks and give it to the poor, which,
That's right. All $6,000 of your Starbucks.
Where's the lie, though? That's I don't know how the math shakes on that, but it sounds right. But I guess moving into Easter, I mean, obviously this is the highest day of the year in basically every Christian tradition. I think some Christians, especially the not particularly observant ones, tend to mistake that for Christmas. Could you explain why Christmas is not the highest day of the year in the calendar?
Sure. Well, I mean, they're both extremely high days. But
I meant this as a softball. I'm not
trying to say anything that will denigrate Christmas, right? I'm not going to denigrate Christmas. There's no reason to. But I think you're right when you say that it does get, Easter gets lost in the Christmas, cultural fervor for whatever reason historically that has shaken out. Easter is definitely the most important day of the year, because if you had somebody like Jesus who was incarnate and born and died, but who did not rise from the dead, then there's no Christian faith. There just isn't. And you can say the same thing about Christmas by saying, well, if there was no incarnation, then we wouldn't be here either. There would be no Christianity with no incarnation, and that's quite true. But Easter in particular represents the victory of the long story that was started at Christmas. So if you don't have Easter, you have a story where Jesus dies, and that's all. If you have Easter, you have a story where he dies and defeats death, and then by the same token, some churches say that he's trampled down death by death, and on those in the tombs, he bestows the life. And that's a literal saying. Without the resurrection of Jesus, you don't have our own resurrection at the end of time when he comes again to judge the quick and the dead. Easter is by far the most important celebration of the year. And the calendar reflects this. So this is something that you'll definitely see, and I would highly, highly encourage you to attend your church's services for Holy Week, and in particular Saturday. This is something that is overlooked. If you think Easter, gets short shrift among the secular culture, Holy Saturday gets the real short shrift in Christian culture, just in general. So one of the oldest liturgical services, again, we're talking back, first, second, third, and fourth centuries here, is the Easter Vigil that's had on Holy Saturday night. And usually this is a very long service, but it's meant to be a vigil, right? We're keeping watch for the moment of Christ's resurrection, from when he was in the tomb to when he came out of the tomb. And some of the practices at a service like this are also extremely primal, extremely old. It usually starts with a fire being lit outside the church and then being brought inside the church. It's a candlelit service usually, and there are readings from the whole redemptive story of the Bible that are read by candlelight in the dark. And then there's a moment when the tone changes suddenly, and we go from the darkest moment after Good Friday to the brightest moment in basically all of redemptive history. We're observing the resurrection of Jesus. There's just no comparison between this day and all other days. So it gets short shrift, and it really shouldn't. I mean, without this tiny moment where you have this extremely dark time giving way to this extremely bright time, the Christian faith is nothing if there's no resurrection. And for the Bible concerned here, I mean that's just echoes of St. Paul. You know, if there is no resurrection, we of everybody are most to be pitied. Everything that we do is in vain if we don't act, if we don't affirm that the resurrection happened and then act as though it happened and carry that through our lives. Observing it is kind of the bare minimum we can do.
Going back to a reference as for another tangent, the quick and the dead. Are there ecumenical differences between how the Nicene Creed is translated? Because in my experience going to Lutheran churches, they say the living and the dead, as opposed to the quick and the dead.
There's no difference in meaning. That's just a difference in the time that the translation was made. So at the time when people said quick to refer to a living person, and we still kind of have this in modern English, the quickening, right, or something cuts you to the quick, you know, it just means living. Yeah, there's no difference in theology there.
I figured it was. I just wasn't sure what the actual divide there was, because I obviously these kind of liturgical traditions, they tend to be preserved for hundreds of years and centuries to the point where it's extremely hard to actually change the wording in them. So if the wording is different, I'm curious at what point that the breakaway happened. I mean, obviously, confessional Lutheranism, a la the Missouri Synod, is very different than ACA Anglicanism, but not necessarily in tenor, because both of them are breakaway movements that are angry with the general flow of the mainline churches, but they are.
Usually the items in the creed are agreed upon by everybody. So
yeah.
You know, one of the benefits of the creed is it gets you beyond whatever the current politics in any given situation are. The church has seen many, and it will continue to see many. But basically, everybody can affirm the tenets of the creed, and if they can't, then that's something to be concerned about. Whether people say the quick and the dead or the living and the dead, that's just verbiage. That's just verbiage. What they mean is when Jesus will come again to judge the people who have already died, and the people who are alive when he comes.
Well, it's verbiage, yes, but it's controversial verbiage. I mean, I know that there's apparently there are Episcopalians and Anglicans that don't like the recent Book of Common Prayer variations because they modernize the language too much. I mean, it's not.
But that's taste. That's not difference in content. You know, we're all affirming the same meaning in those words, at least as far as the creeds go. And again, if you're not, then that's something to look at.
So we aren't full Latin Mass Catholic in terms of like our inability to tolerate any level of change. Then.
No, certainly not. Certainly not.
I know.
No, I mean, it sounds silly, but it's worth saying, you know, no, there's nothing magical about English or about a certain version of English. Ultimately, these things are taste-based. So, you know, you can express concern with the translation if you think that it's gotten away from the original sense of what was trying to be said. But ultimately, a lot of things that people like to kind of demarcate their identity on, they're ultimately taste. As much as I enjoy the older style, somebody who says the living and the dead is affirming exactly the same thing that I'm affirming when I say the quick and the dead.
Yeah, I mean, far be it from me to get my theological takes from psychotic people on Twitter, but I love the people that just, you know, they go online and being like, you know, if you aren't using the classic pre-Vatican I rite for Catholicism, you are beyond salvation. I mean, like, all right, kid. Okay, 25-year-old kid who's never read the Bible fully more than once. I enjoy your spicy pre-Vatican II hot takes.
Yeah, no, I would definitely say, well, if anybody gives you a hard time over that, don't worry about it. I mean, that's not a real item of concern.
No, I just, you know, I do what any sensible person does, and I submit it to cursed papist images, and, you know, let him take care of it. But, and anyway, moving beyond, did we talk about Easter Day specifically, or just Easter the week before it?
Well, so the vigil that I was mentioning actually is the first celebration of Easter Day. So I don't know if you've ever been to like a midnight Christmas service, been to like a midnight mass, that type of thing.
I've been to candlelight services, but never a midnight Christmas service.
I see. Well, it's a similar concept. It's just that the Easter vigil is much older, and for some reason, gets short shrift culturally. But the idea of a vigil, right? The idea of staying up late to watch the day break. You know, so on Saturday evening is actually the first time you celebrate Sunday morning, basically. And Easter Day is just kind of a recap of this. And one important thing to say as well is lost in the cultural conversation, even about Christmas, is that these things are not just single days; they're whole seasons. You get to celebrate for way more than one day. It's just that one day is the beginning and often gets marked. Christmas is a 12-day season. That's why we have that song about the 12 days of Christmas that is now totally divorced from its religious meaning. But Easter is the same. Easter is a 40-day period. And the reason for that, again, 40 is a symbolic number, but 40 is the number of days that the risen Jesus stayed with the apostles before ascending into heaven. So these things are straight out of the biblical narrative, and getting the chance to observe them over a longer period of time than just one day, we can't possibly cram in all of our celebration of the greatest event that's ever occurred in human history into one 24-hour cycle, and we don't try to. And that's another nice thing about the liturgical calendar in general, is you get a nice amount of time to do these things. Easter is a whole season. It's not just one day.
What is the season after Easter called? Is it Easter season, or is there a name for it?
People call it Eastertide. They also call it Paschal time, Paschal tide, something like that, because Paschal means Easter. We know about the Paschal lamb and things like this. So Easter is its own 40-day season. Some people will put it at 50 days if they're counting after the Ascension, I believe, through Pentecost. But then after that, you get the long season of ordinary time, which is kind of the reach through the end of the year. So we started from the middle of the year, which is a little bit strange, but we're after Easter. There is basically a long season that is called ordinary time, where no major feast is being observed. There's nothing like a Christmas or an Easter in there. It's just a longer stretch where you get to reflect, I guess, on the outworkings of everything that happened at Easter and at Pentecost, and God working through the consequences of all of those things. And through that, the kind of ending of that season, before we jump right back into Advent, which is considered the beginning of the Christian year, is All Saints. And so you can kind of think of All Saints as being a marker in the same way that Revelation is a marker for the end of the narrative. You've gone through all of Jesus's life, death, resurrection, and ascension and outworkings to us. And then you get to finally talk about the saints, which I know is maybe a controversial word in Protestant circles, but it shouldn't be. What we mean by that is we mean the faithful people, right? We mean the church. We mean the people that make up the church. Because what Jesus did has consequences for us. We follow where he went. He came and did these things so that we could do them as well, so that we could die and be resurrected on that last day. And so on All Saints, which kind of closes out the end of ordinary time, it closes out the calendar year, we from that stretch from Easter on, we get to reflect on how those things were down to us. All Saints is kind of the culmination of that as well.
How does Pentecost fit into that? Is that a feast day or a season?
It depends on who you ask, but that's just a matter of terminology. The day of Pentecost, it's kind of like the day of Easter, or the day of Christmas, it's the first day. Some people reckon ordinary time as the Sundays after Pentecost. So when you're late in ordinary time, in late October or so, you'll get, we're on the 25th Sunday after Pentecost. There's also something that's called Trinity Sunday, which other Anglican branches reckon their ordinary time. You might say we're the 24th Sunday after Trinity or something like that. But you're right to link that to Pentecost. Pentecost, of course, is the descending of the Holy Spirit on the apostles after the resurrection and ascension of Jesus. It's the formation of the church. And so that kind of goes back to what I said. It's the redounding of those things to us, the benefits of Christ's passion, death, and resurrection to the church, to the people, to the rest of us human beings. And Pentecost is therefore a season in sense. But I wouldn't call ordinary time the season of Pentecost per se. We usually say after Pentecost to talk about the Sundays in that time.
Another tangent, but speaking of Pentecost, does the Episcopal Church have any tradition of charisma? Because I know that as I have a lot of charismatic friends in my personal life, and they've been trying to lure me into the to everything they're into. And I was curious if there's any intersection between that and the tradition I've been falling into.
Um, Historically, no. Not in the sense that most people mean when they think about the charismatic movements, when they think about baptism in the Spirit or speaking in tongues or that sort of thing. No, not historically. You will get some people who will draw a conceptual line between the Anglican Church and John Wesley, who is the figurehead of the Methodist movement. Because the Methodists, Methodists are kind of, in my mind, they're kind of like the little brother of the Anglican tradition. They were Anglicans, but they had their own theological emphases on sanctification. I need to actually do certain things that will actually make me purer, and I need to get my head in the right place in order to do that. So things like revivals and all of that. Some people draw a line from that philosophy through to a more charismatic philosophy. They call it the holiness movement. The idea that I can become holier and actually experience some degree of perfection progressively in my life as a Christian. But I would say that is not usually what people mean when they are talking about the more modern charismatic movement. I would say probably since the 60s or so. So not in the Episcopal Church, not really. In the ACNA, certain political concerns have caused charismatic Anglican groups to unite with more evangelical Anglican groups, and then some of them have united with more Catholic Anglican groups to kind of form a coalition. That seems to be my assessment of what's happening, but that's kind of a new thing, in my opinion.
Back to the liturgical calendar, but you talked about All Saints' Day. Is that different or connected to Halloween?
Okay, good question. So yeah, this is another thing that culturally we've overshadowed, right? Halloween is the day. Halloween, of course, comes from All Hallows Eve. That's where we get that word Halloween. It's like Hallow even, Halloween. And so All Saints' Day is November 1st, and All Hallows is another word for saint. And so All Hallows Eve, All Saints' Eve is the day before it. That's October 31st, which is our modern celebration of Halloween. We could get into the weeds a little bit on this one, but I'll avoid it. So there's also a day after All Saints' Day called All Souls' Day, and some people celebrate this and some people don't. So if you want like a tangent to go down on a Wikipedia rabbit hole later, I recommend that one. But so All Saints' Day is pretty widely affirmed by everybody in the liturgical calendar tradition, and Halloween is the day before. Now, some superstitious people or some, I don't know, I guess just more supernaturally minded people than most today, thought that the veil was very thin between the time before All Saints' Day and All Saints' Day. So I guess maybe just to back up, All Saints' Day celebrates the communion of saints. These are the Christians who have gone before us, and we consider ourselves to be in communion with them. We form a straight line with the way that they lived and died in the faith, and we look back at them as examples for how we can live in our faith. And All Saints' Day is a day where that connection is especially salient. And so some people thought that the day before leading into that, it was kind of a thin time, it's a thin place. So, certain supernatural things might happen. So we get these cultural, quaint many traditions that evolved about ghosts and about these types of things. And this is ultimately where our idea of Halloween comes from. But ultimately, that's a time that's maybe a little bit uncomfortable to the modern culture because it does deal with death. And we kind of don't know how to deal with that. But it deals with the death of the people who went before us and our connection to them in Christ. We make one body, one family together. We're all part of the body, even over time. And yeah, Halloween is historically connected in with that. And so it's not a Christian holiday on the calendar, but you can say quite accurately that it is the day before All Saints' Day. Sure, why not? It doesn't have its own special liturgy or anything like that. But
zooming out a bit, how does what is the purpose of the feast days? I know Jonathan Pageau has talked a little about one of the purposes of the calendar is to create these periods of the year where there's a sense of variety and change as time is passing, so that you don't wind up in COVID time when literally every day is exactly the same as literally every day that came before it, and you're just drudging through monotony. So some of it's about, upending daily life and creating moments of controlled chaos, and you see that in like the Catholic Carnival and things like that. Which I don't know if Anglicans have any sort of version of, but I assume that All Saints Day is supposed to have some connection to that, and or Halloween does it some have some connection to that.
You can think of it that way. I mean, again, that's not really like a Christian holiday per se, but it is something that took on its own cultural life. And often that's how these things work. So you mentioned Carnival, and yeah, the Anglican tradition does have a small little version of that to kind of like clear out your gluttony before Lent. So the fast is going to start, right? But do so to the glory of God. If you're going to eat well, then do that to the glory of God on the day where it's appropriate to do that. And so, yeah, I mean, I think he's right when he talks about you don't want every day to be exactly the same. Frankly, you just can't perceive everything you would need to perceive, and so it's better to highlight certain themes on some days and other themes on other days, so you can observe them all properly. But yeah, so Carnival, the period preceding Lent, when it's usually just Bacchanalia, right? I mean, in some places that goes overboard, but one Anglican thing to do is on Shrove Tuesday, which is the day before Ash Wednesday. Now, Shrove means to pardon. So your sins get shriven. You go tell the priest that you need an absolution. He gives you an absolution, and you're getting Shrove or Shroven. I'm not sure what the correct tense is. Anyway, we call it Shrove Tuesday. You're supposed to, clear things out before Lent. And one thing that Anglicans do is they make pancakes. And this is a cultural thing that goes way back. This is an English tradition that made its way into the U.S. People were cleaning out their cupboards of fat and flour and sugar, all the things that you're not supposed to have during the Lenten fast. It's supposed to be more ascetic than that. But so even now, a lot of Anglican churches will have Shrove Tuesday pancake suppers, that type of thing. They'll make pancakes. So you get to eat this like fat, nice meal to the glory of God, and then the next day you get to start fasting to the glory of God. Also, you can kind of do both, but you can't do them on the same day, right? I mean, you just can't possibly highlight both of those themes at one time. So you have to spread them out.
And I guess that kind of brings us into around all the way to Advent. I mean, we didn't. One thing I want to clear up real quick though. What is the purpose of a feast day? Is there something? Is it supposed to be something where you gather mass? Are you supposed to meet up with people afterward? I believe traditionally that's how it was, but is there any sort of modern version of that where it's celebrated in any sort of way?
Well, feast in the most general sense is basically any positive observation. So I guess maybe I should ask you. I mean, what do you mean by what's your question about feast day specifically? Like, what do you mean by feast day?
When I hear the term feast day, it sounds like the implication sounds like this is supposed to be a day where you're supposed to host a large party with people and eat, because that's what a feast means nowadays, as opposed to what I assume what the traditional definition of that is.
Well, no, I mean that's right. I mean, in one sense or another. So yeah, you'll often see feast days as days where a mass is celebrated, right? Or actually, the arrow points the other way. Every mass is a feast. What are you doing when you get together to share the Eucharist? What are you doing when you share Holy Communion? You're having a meal together. You're keeping a feast together. So the idea of keeping a feast, in time is kind of where this comes in again. You're supposed to observe something on a certain day, and if it's a good event, if it's a good reason to be gathering, those are feasts, right? There's something to celebrate. We talk about celebrating the Eucharist and celebrating Mass or celebrating Holy Communion. The person who does this is the celebrant. He's the one that is in charge of the feast, right? This is a common theme. We get together and eat. And of course, what are we doing other than that when we get together for the Eucharist? Now, feast days, in that sense, you don't always have to have a Eucharist or anything like that, but I mean, it's often an occasion where it would be appropriate to do so. If your question is more about why do we have them in time, why are there feast days? I mean, I would just come back to the original, kind of my original answer of you do have to break things up. You have to observe different things on different days. If you tried to do them all on one day, that would not be possible to get all the possible shades of meaning out. So you can celebrate these good events, even the ones that don't seem so good. I mean, days like Maundy Thursday, where Christ is betrayed and goes into the garden. I mean, that's a feast day. Ultimately, these things are are good. They're part of our redemptive story. The reason why we have to have multiple feast days is because there's so many of them that we have to highlight in our own way.
And my question wasn't specifically about like the last part. More, it was more so just about what the observational practice is when it comes to a feast day. Because I'm curious, because I have them all over the calendar. I mean, there's also the calendar. My calendar also has all sorts of things on here that I have no idea how I'm supposed to, celebrate it. Like a lot of it's just noting prominent ecumenical like passings of major religious figures, or mentioning like this is the day George Herbert passed, which okay, that's useful. But there's other things in here that it's not really clear about, such as something in quotations quinquagesima. Like a lot of it's just kind of vague. So when I see the feast days, I'm like, okay, is this a feast day where they're supposed to? I'm sorry.
You mean like practically? What am I supposed to do on a feast day?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, I got it. Okay, well, part of it's about what you're supposed to do, and part of it is about what the church is supposed to do. So the church is supposed to offer, usually a Eucharist is appropriate, but not everybody has the time or resources to do that. But usually the church helps you observe these feast days. They have some sort of event. They have some sort, even if it's just a simple mass that is said quietly. It doesn't have to be any large event, but it's an opportunity for the faithful people to gather. So that's what the church should be doing. If you want to, some feast days are bigger than others. Some are rather minor, or they're on a weekday, and so people probably can't leave work to go and observe them. But they are things that the church is supposed to keep. They're supposed to celebrate them whether you can be there or not, because that's the church's job. So your job as a layperson is, if you can go, if the church is going to do something, if you can go, you should go. And if there's not anything, then you should try to pray. So for a lot of these major feast days, one place you can look is in your Book of Common Prayer, and there are collects for the common feast days, at least the very major ones that are common to most Anglicans. There are collects in there, special prayers that ask God for certain things that are in keeping with the thematic reason for the feast. So we just celebrated the feast of Saint Matthias, I think either yesterday or the day before, I don't recall. Maybe they transferred it, don't remember. But you can look in your Book of Common Prayer for a collect for the feast of Saint Matthias, and it'll say something like, I don't know exactly what it says, but it'll say something like, today we're remembering how Matthias was chosen after Judas was not in the communion of the apostles anymore. He was chosen for such and such a reason. Help us be like him, in X, Y, and Z. Amen. And so that's just something that you can do as a layperson, doing your part to keep the feast. Because guess what? As a layperson, you're a part of the church. And even if somebody else isn't able to pray that at that time, you are keeping the feast, even if your local outpost of the church is not. You're part of the church. You're praying for the same things that people from time immemorial have been praying for. You're part of that larger communion. So we all keep the feasts together. There's a communal aspect to this that's important.
Is there anything like Ash Wednesday within the tradition, where obviously there is an element of required participation?
Required in what way?
Well, like Ash Wednesday in the Catholic Church, you have to go get ash like put on your head before you go out into go out for the world. Like when I used to live in Chicago, they would stick priests like at all the major furroways and just say, if if this is Ash Wednesday, stop by this corner, we'll get you your ashes and you can go to work. Like, so there's like obviously Catholicism has the kind of resources to do that sort of thing, but is there anything like that in the Anglican Church, which obviously is much more limited in size and scope?
You're talking about Ash Wednesday specifically?
Yeah.
Yep, we definitely do Ash Wednesday. So there's no, but again, we kind of come back to that same, you don't have to do anything, but you should want to do these things. Ash Wednesday is the beginning of Lent. It's the beginning of the fast, and that's an appropriate time to go get ashes on your forehead. And usually that's done in the context, if you've got the time, it's done in the context of a Eucharist, or at least some sort of service. Even if there's not a Eucharist attached to it, it's something that's usually done communally. You're all there together to be reminded, okay, we're going to enter this period of fasting. We're going to prepare ourselves and try to make improvements to our, sinful issues. And Lent is a time for this kind of serious introspection. And one of the things you might be reflecting on is that you're going to die one day. And, here's some ashes to remind you of that. You're made of dust and you're going to return to dust. So time to draw closer to God as we enter this period of fasting, in your, kind of mortal, frail state. That you're hoping is going to be fortified by the end of it to go through the observance of the resurrection. Do you have to do any of those things? Of course not. But you should certainly want to. This is a feast that's kept by the church, and you're part of it.
And I guess that leads us all full circle to, I guess, the what we'll kind of wrap on, which is Advent and Christmas, which is, as we've discussed offline several times, is one of my major bugaboos with the Christmas season. So, I mean, as anyone who follows me online knows, I went full Christmas on All Saints Day, because I enjoy being that guy who just has Christmas stuff up on Twitter a month and a half early, just for the sake of annoying people about Christmas. So, you brought up some good points about the role of Advent and having things in their proper season. Because could you kind of go into how the Advent season works?
Sure. Yeah. So yes. So we kind of came at this backward. We started in the middle of the year talking about Lent, but Advent is actually the beginning of the Christian year. And Advent has a few layers to it. So we can talk about at least two Advents. Advent means coming. The advent of something is when that thing arrives. And so as a lead up to Christmas, one sense of the term Advent is Christ's coming in flesh, right? We're looking forward to the incarnation. That's what we observe at Christmas. And so that's something to prepare for. So in the same way that Lent is a penitential season where we prepare for Easter, Advent can be seen as a penitential season where we prepare for Christmas. And so, that's not to say that there can't be joy in that anticipation, but it is a self-preparatory season for a proper observation of Christ's incarnation that we observe at Christmas. So that's one sense of the term Advent. Another one, which kind of lives just right on top of it, and you'll see these themes like this, really intertwined in things like hymns or other things that are done in church services in Advent. The second sense of Advent there is his second coming, where, as we said in the beginning, he'll come to judge the quick and the dead, the living and the dead. So Advent in that sense is also a season of introspection and preparing yourself to meet that reality when it comes. So again, that's also not to say that can't be joyful. We live in the Christian hope of the return of Christ, right? But there's certainly work to do before that happens. You shouldn't be caught unprepared. Not the day or the hour when that will come. But at least the liturgical season affords you this little block of time to think about that theme particularly. So you can do this joyfully and happily because it's a good thing that these things are coming. It's a good thing to observe Christ being incarnate. I mean, what a wonderful miracle at Christmas. And it's good to anticipate him coming again, but there's introspection to be done. There's work to be done. And so you shouldn't celebrate them early. I mean, you can do whatever you want to do. Nobody's going to call the police, Advent police. Right? But there's something to be said for keeping things in their proper season. I know you can't really avoid it because the secular culture is what it is, and Christmas starts the day after Halloween. But what I would submit to you is that you can. I think the reason why people start so early is just because they're really wanting to have that goodness that comes with Christmas. It's a fun time. It's good. It's happy. It's joyful, and you just need that in the bleak, winter time. But I would submit to you that you can still have the extremely long Christmas celebration season. The church actually affords you that. The liturgical calendar gives you that. It just gives you that on the other side of Christmas. So Advent is the 4-week season preparing you for Christmas. And then you can celebrate Christmas all the way through basically now. A couple weeks ago, we celebrated what's called Candlemas, or it's called in some other texts, the presentation of Christ in the temple. So that's the day where we mark Christ being brought into the temple by Mary and Joseph, and Simeon is there, and he says, finally, I've seen the Messiah. I was promised to see the Messiah, and so now I can go in peace. I can depart in peace because I've seen what God, you promised that you would show me, right? So this is an epiphany type of season, right? The Gentiles and the other Jews are getting to see Christ. And wow, that's great. You can celebrate Christmas basically up to that point. I mean, that's like a several week stretch. You can have your long, Christmas festivities, and you should, because it's a great feast. It's a great time that needs to be celebrated over more than just one day. You can go for the 12 days of Christmas. You can go after the 12 days strictly of Christmas, right through Epiphany, right up until the presentation of Christ in the temple. And that just ended a couple weeks ago. So you can fulfill that need to celebrate this great thing. The secular culture knows that it needs to celebrate this great thing. It just doesn't know when. We can tell them when. There's a time to do it.
Oh man, you just gave me a license to be even more obnoxious this year. Thanks a lot for that.
You can just do it on the other side.
But speaking of Mary, I mean, I one of the only is going off of the Catholic version of the liturgical calendar. As far as I can tell, the only major I haven't looked far enough into December, but I don't think you guys celebrate the feast of the Immaculate Conception, right?
No, that's not typically an Anglican belief in the Immaculate Conception. So just to clear it up, I think Protestants often hear Immaculate Conception and they think it, or maybe just even secular people think it refers to Jesus, right? Like he was born without sin. No.
Well, yeah, and I know it's
Mary.
I know it's a Marian thing, but I'm sure lots of people are confused by it. It's like, why are you celebrating the Immaculate Conception 3 weeks before he was born?
Yeah, that would be confusing, So, yeah, I mean, that's one of those areas that you are free to believe it if you like, but I wouldn't say that that's a traditionally Anglican belief. There's no need to subscribe to that. You may, but it's not something that's observed.
No, yeah, and this is one of those, massive disagreements between Catholicism and literally everyone else, where, I've met a couple of Calvinists who've gotten weirdly into Marianism out of some sort of bizarre, I don't know, some sort of, deep dive into the traditions, and they're really, they get really sucked into it, but, it's very rare to find a Protestant that actually takes Marianism seriously, and a lot of times I know a lot of, secular or generally disinterested people who get sucked into Catholicism because they like Marianism, because they want that kind of, approach to the divine feminine. But it's one of those things where as a Protestant, I'm like, I'm going to need to sola scriptura that for a second. Please provide some quote and verse on this, and then we can move on. But,
Right. So if you're talking about certain dogmatic positions, I mean, they're called dogmatic for a reason. It's because they don't really proceed from anything else, right? If you're talking about the Immaculate Conception, I think you may have a theological system that suggests it, but it's not strictly necessary. However, just one thing to guard against is that Anglicans, Episcopalians, etc., do have a very high regard for Mary. So it depends on what you mean by Marianism. If you mean praying that Mary will save you instead of Jesus, her son, that's a problem. There's a line that you shouldn't cross. But it's not uncommon to see Mary as basically the, if not the, one of the best human beings who ever lived. It's a very, very big deal to be the person who bears God, who gives birth to God. And so this is where things like, Mother of God come in. You talked about the divine feminine briefly. And the correct understanding of Mary, in my view, is not as the divine feminine, but it's as kind of who we all should strive to be in our position as humans. Mary, the kind of active principle in God comes to her and she responds yes, right? She receives God properly. And this is kind of the archetype of all of humanity. We are in a less powerful situation and we should say yes. There's a lot to say here, but I will say one thing in defense of some things like Marian prayers, or at least the classic Marian things like Marian antiphons, Hail Mary and all of that. I will say that in their proper place, they're not actually about her, they're about him. So, again, in defense of my Catholic brothers and sisters, because I have certain liturgical preferences as well, personally, but Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee, blessed art thou among women, blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. It's not about her, it's about him. So if you see Mary in prayer going off in the direction that is more about her than it is about him, that's a problem. But good Mary in prayer always is about her son. It's always about, show us show us, make us, this, not that Mary can make us in particular, but it's always a pointer to him. Why? Because that's what Mary, the person, when she was living here among us, did. She always pointed to her son. She always directed people there. This is a tangent, but that's kind of the litmus test that you can use, I think, and the one that many Anglicans do use. Is it actually more about Jesus? As long as the focus is kept where it ought to be, you'll find a diversity of practice on that.
That seems to be what I've experienced. I mean, my priest, he said basically the same thing. I can be very Marian personally, but the church itself does not affirm it. It's something that has to be judged on a case by case basis and on a individual philosophical level to the degree you want to embrace it. I mean, I think that there's probably something to the idea that most Protestants don't give Mary enough credit. Most Catholics give her too much credit. And like in my apartment, I have a lot of Orthodox and Catholic art because I like the way that it captures these great, beautiful moments of Christian theology in this very complex way. I mean, I have a wood carved La Pieta on top of my on a shelf, and it's one of the most beautiful images of the entire Christian iconography. It's a beautiful image of motherhood, and I think things like that have a good place in the tradition, but like you said, it has to point back to Christ. Otherwise, it's not serving its purpose.
Yep, that's exactly right. And so you'll find a lot of churches, I guess, like your priest had said, is that it may or may not be, depending on the community, it may or may not be something that's appropriate for the communal worship of that parish, right? That's something that if it's a stumbling block to people, it should be done away with. If it helps people, it should be done within appropriate constraints. But ultimately the church's job in liturgical worship is to be collective worship, it's to be corporate and communal. It's something that everybody, when the priest prays, everybody should be able to say amen. And part of that is adequate teaching, so are you disagreeing? If you can't say amen, are you disagreeing because you just don't know something and somebody ought to teach it to you? Or are you disagreeing because this is a real bone of theological contention, even within the confines of what we would teach as standard doctrine? Those things should be left to one side. And kind of Anglicans inherit from the prayer book practice of this, where a lot of the prayers can be read in multiple ways, such that not in a weaselly way, but in a pastoral way. You can read in what you like to a certain degree within the bounds of the tradition, so that you can actually say amen to the collective prayer. Things like very niche Marian devotions probably would not be appropriate there, depending on the community. So that seems in line with what I think as well.
There you go. That's there's your Christian calendar. I guess we got all the way. Was there anything we missed? Do you think that we hit all the big points?
I think we hit all the big points, right? Well, maybe I can just say it from the top, because we did do it a little bit out of order. We've got Advent, we've got Christmas, we've got Epiphany, and you got Lent, which we are now in at the time of this broadcast. We're moving toward Easter, and then you'll have a long period of ordinary time before it all starts over again. And this is something that, once you start doing it, it's one of those things that will follow you your entire life. You're a person who can't escape the passage of time. You might as well sanctify it while you got it.
There you go. So last time we talked, you were working on Scriptural Book of Common Prayer and a couple other projects. Do you have anything else you want to, shout out that's been come to fruition since then, or you're working on now?
Nothing new since then in particular, but yeah, if anybody's interested about learning more about the Book of Common Prayer and wants a resource to see some of the biblical references to that, yeah, the Scriptural BCP is a good place to look. I would still direct you there.
All right, and then as always, you can find her on the Spencer, the Saint Spencer of Claven locals community, and go hang out there and join whatever's going on, whatever he's doing. But beyond that, do you want to shout anything else, or?
I don't think so. I'm on Twitter, which is just my name, but that's all.
There you go. Well, good talking to you again, and kind of good going through this. I appreciate you taking an hour out of your time to explain all this. So thank you.
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks.
Have a wonderful day.
You too.
The Antisocial Network is a Groupthink Productions podcast. Editing, producing, and hosting are by Tyler Hummel. Artwork by Crystal Cowley. and original music was composed by Melissa Lafira and the late Dan Smola. Like, subscribe, and please let us know what you think about the show in the comments below if you'd like to see anyone interesting be a guest on the show. Thank you for listening.